Hello and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. If it sounds a little bit different today, that's because it is. I'm driving. Yes, I'm holding a microphone, sitting in traffic, and people next to me are looking at me like I'm kind of crazy. Why am I doing this, do you ask? I'm not going to lie. I'm insanely busy. Sometimes I have to multitask. Actually, not sometimes, pretty much all the time. Because as a lot of people in independent music do, they do way too many things. Yeah, sometimes time is at a premium. And if I'm able to do two things at once, then so be it. But that's not why you came here. You came here to listen to an interview. And that interview today is with Daniel Wonacott from the band Finch. Now, I'm sure some of you are just like, yo, Finch? Like, there's still a band? What? What's happening? Finch was absolutely massive in the late 90s, early 2000s, in the Southern California scene, but I mean, nationwide as well. They just captured this really interesting moment in aggressive music, if you will, where, you know, they took everything that Glassjaw was doing and they made it extremely poppy, and they made it their own version of it. This guest idea came from an email exchange I had with somebody where they were like, hey, I think someone for Finch would be interesting. And then I started to look around, and, you know, I always kind of pick who I would define as the most, could provide the most interesting interview. And then I looked, and I was like, there's not much information about Finch out there. Like, they don't do very many interviews. They're not that horribly interested in speaking very much about their own personal lives. Like, across the board from each individual member, like, you get nuggets where it's like, yeah, they came from the desert, and yeah, they're these people that did this thing, but there isn't much contextual evidence. So anyways, I had no idea how to get a hold of them. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll tell you all about that in a minute. Let's get some business niceties out of the way. Visit 100wordspodcast.com. On the right side of the page, you'll be able to do three things I would love for you to do. One, donate to the show. This thing doesn't pay for itself. It doesn't take an incredible amount of resources and time for me to do this. It does. I said it doesn't, but no, it does. You know, just pony it up a little bit. That's all I'm saying. Sign up for our email newsletter. I try to send it out once a week. I realized last week I screwed up. I didn't do that, and I apologize. But you get, more context, more conversation points for this person that I had on the show. And then plus I give you a preview of who's coming up the following week. And then the third thing is email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. And that way we can become friends. It's pretty interesting how the correspondences I have with people over email sometimes turn into really weird and interesting things. Like sometimes business relationships, sometimes advice columns. And I love the relationship that I form with pretty much everybody that emails me and is willing to kind of have a honest and open discussion. Anyways, business niceties out of the way. So like I said, I didn't know where to go in regards to reaching out to Finch. So I knew they're on a record label called Razor and Tie, and they've been extremely kind to me in the past as far as hooking me up with their artists. And that's what they did. And they were like, hey, how about you speak to Daniel, the guitarist? He's kind of doing the most interviews. So again, couldn't really do much research. I knew very little about him besides the fact that his cousin is the singer. And that was kind of it. So I always hate going into conversations like completely blind where I don't have a personal relationship and I have very few strings to pull on. But it was such a good conversation. I loved it because I could tell that he was engaged and listening. And we just talked about a bunch of cool stuff. No better way of describing it than just letting you listen to the conversation unfold. So here is my chat with Daniel from Finch, and I will talk to you afterwards.
Can't you see that I want to be there with open arms? It's empty tonight.
Usually I start this off with just like my own sort of personal interjection as far as like Finch in general. Because you joined the band around 2007, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, I mean, my first memory was more so around the, it was probably 2000, 2001, whenever What It Is to Burn came out. I played in bands and I was involved in the hardcore and punk scene in Southern California for quite some time. And then at the time I was working at an independent record store, and I remember us all of a sudden starting to sell a lot of Finch.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? I was like, this is weird. Like, what? I just hadn't seen Finch playing like a lot of shows in the Southern California area. What It Is to Burn came out, obviously the EP prior to that, but then What It Is to Burn came out, and I loved the record. I went to see Finch without you at House of Blues Anaheim, It just blew my mind because I was like, it seemed like Finch existed in some sort of weird vacuum where the band had arrived and all of a sudden it was like, holy shit, these guys are like the biggest thing of all time.
They were like that back then. I was probably at that Anaheim show.
Right. I was going to say, I was like, I'm sure you can offer an interesting perspective, seeing the fact that you've obviously been with the band for, many years now, but you weren't a part of it then. And I'm sure you were kind of attuned to what the band was doing at the time, but it did seem weird. Like, did they exist in some vacuum where it was like all of a sudden they had kind of fully arrived?
Yeah, I mean, all of us did. I grew up with those guys. We all went to school together. Nate, the singer, is my cousin. We grew up playing music and writing music together, and I watched them go from a regular old garage band to basically a headlining national act that really put on a great show, almost overnight. The funny thing about it is, the city we grew up in Temecula, is such a suburban wasteland. There's no scene, you know what I mean? There's no contemporaries. There's nothing to measure things by. We all had to drive a couple hours to go see shows when we were kids. There was nothing going on in our town, nowhere to play, nothing to do. I think it's just a testament really to a group of fairly motivated guys that wanted to get the hell out of their little suburban town, and they figured out a way to do it,
I definitely see exactly where you're coming from, because playing in bands from Orange County, it was one of those things where it's like anytime we kind of went outside where it's like, whatever, we play the showcase in Corona or we play, especially like Temecula definitely seemed like another world where it was like, yeah, you're right. There was no shows. There was no places to play except like a skating rink or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, for every summer there was someone that tried to throw shows somewhere at a skate rink or a community park or whatever, and there was always one good show, and then stuff got shut down and bands never had an opportunity to do anything. And, these guys figured out how to do it. I mean, looking back, you realize that it's because they wrote a bunch of great songs that really is what made it happen. But, they didn't get the education that a lot of like New York hardcore bands got, LA bands get, where you grow up watching, maybe your older brother was in a band, or the guy down the street had a great band, or, whatever, a great punk rock venue around the corner that's got a lot of history. I mean, we didn't have any of that.
There's obviously, I mean, I can definitely attribute my own liking of the band as far as just being like, okay, listening to, What It Is to Burn. And I focus on that just because it was such a, this is how I described it to people who were interested in the band, but didn't want to buy the record from me at the record store. I was like, hey, you like Glassjaw? Okay, this is a more accessible version of Glassjaw.
Yeah. I mean, basically, I know all about the record and how it was made and everything over the years, hanging out with the dudes and watching it happen when it was happening. And they literally just sat down and wrote the record that they wanted to listen to. You know what I mean? It wasn't we want to be like Glassjaw, or we want to be, I think they felt like they were making a Smashing Pumpkins record or a Deftones record. It just came out a little different. You know what I mean? And that's what you get when there's not a lot of contemporaries around to watch. You know what I mean? You get something that's a little bit unique. You know what I mean? And I think that record in particular has really held up. And it's because the songs. They're great songs.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. You yourself, you were you born and raised in Temecula, or did you end up there via other instances?
Well, I was born in Long Beach. And then my parents moved to Temecula when I was in first or second grade, and they bought a little deli down in Old Town Temecula, and we started going to school in Temecula, and that's how we ended up there. So basically, I was raised there.
Yeah. What was your family structure like? Do you have brothers and sisters? And what were were both your parents working at the deli?
Yeah. Both my parents worked there, and I have one older brother. And my cousin Nate has an older brother, Matt, and we would all just hang out at the deli after school and go run around town. And eventually we all got guitars and a drum set, and we all kind of figured out how to play instruments. We had our own little band when we were like 11 years old, just learning Nirvana songs and Guns N' Roses songs and all kinds of stuff,
It's cute. It's a very like sort of Norman Rockwellian existence you guys had, where it was like, all the cousins hanging out with each other, and then they start to play in a band, and like it's very it's charming.
It's kind of funny. It is.
And so who was the first one of you to kind of start to bring the heavier edge or the more independent edge to everybody else, to be like, yo, you need to check out this Nirvana record or whatever it was?
Well, there was my next door neighbor growing up. name was Travis. He had an older brother. I forget his name now. I think it was like AJ or something like that. His older brother, he was like 16 and we were, 11 or 12 or something. And you'd walk into his room. This was probably about 89, 91, something around there. And because we were all about 10, 11 years old. So probably like right around 1990. You'd walk into his room and it was typical teenager suburban mecca of like, posters on the wall. Guns N' Roses, Jane's Addiction, Rat, Warrant, everything. You know what I mean? And as a little kid, you walk into an older teenager's room and you see all these, it was all out of Hit Parader, right?
Mm-hmm.
The old Hit Parade magazine. And he really got us into heavy music. So what we would do is, when he was out with his friends, we'd go dub all of his cassette tapes.
Nice.
Yeah. So we really got on, dubbing cassettes and passing them around school, and other people at school would start to get into heavy music. And then I think the first real record that grabbed me, someone gave me a Chili Peppers record. I think it was Styley, I guess, probably. We would walk down to the warehouse and we would buy a lot of cassette tapes. You could get them in the used bin,
right,
for $1.99 or something like that. You'd save your lunch money and go down and buy a record instead, so
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that common experience that people have when they do like go into an older sibling or like you said, older teenager's room where it's like you look at everything and you're just like, what's that?
Yeah, and there's no, to me, there was no like, oh, this band's good or this band's bad, or I had no way of telling whether Rat or Warrant was any better than Dead Kennedys or anything else. It just all looked dangerous. You know what I mean? Yeah. It all looked cool as hell. So
it all. I love obviously the genrelessness that happens when you're a kid. You're just like, all this is part of the same pot, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something mom and dad don't like. So
totally. Yeah, there's two categories of music.
Yeah.
And so then, so what kind of teenager did you find yourself being like when you were going through high school and obviously started to, experiment with music and stuff like that? Were you kind of the introverted kid, or were you the one that was, playing sports, but then also had this musician side to yourself?
Well, I grew up. My mom was a golf pro, so I grew up playing golf, and
that's incredible. I think there's like 10 of us that are out there that played golf. Like junior PGA was like what I did in my life.
Yeah,
as
me
well.
too. Yeah, absolutely.
Dude,
I went to the junior world, and I was a scratch golfer when I was 12, probably.
Dude,
I was,
so cool.
Yeah.
So did your mom actually play on the tour?
Yeah. Before she had me and my brother, she played a little bit on the tour.
Nice.
And then she was teaching
before you guys ruined her life, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how it goes.
That's incredible. So you were fully focused on golf.
Yeah, and music at the same time. So I was the kid that was showing up to golf practice in high school with Liberty spikes and mascara on, and I was fully punk rock and gothed out, trying to play golf at the same time. And I still play golf once in a while. It's fun. I'm teaching my son how to play golf right now, but yeah, that's kind of how we grew up. I was the kid, we used to dye our hair with Kool-Aid and go to the thrift store and get army jackets and, trying to be as punk rock as you can in a little suburban town where there's nothing,
Right. I definitely always, tell me if you identified with this. I always liked the sort of duality of things that you could do, like using golf, because like golf is like literally the most unpunk thing you can think of.
Yeah.
And so it's like you had this world that you could live in where it was like, dude, I could be kind of like you were alluding to, where it's like the punk rock golfer. Like I could be this sort of anti-establishment guy that's like, not your mom's way to play the game or whatever.
Yeah.
But then there was this world, obviously, you lived in where you were dyeing your hair as well and identified with that.
Yeah, I mean, at that age, from like 11 to 14 or 15 or whatever, it's like you can't really do any wrong. My parents were really supportive of everything that we wanted to do. It's like they didn't mind that we were making a bunch of noise in the garage and playing music, and they when they could afford to, they'd help us buy a guitar or a drum set or whatever, or make us work for it. And they loved it all. They were very supportive parents, and it's there was a nice little window there, I guess, in life where it was like, yeah, man, I could play golf and have my friends and play video games and be in a band and do whatever,
Right.
and none of it mattered. And then, when you get to high school, there's much more clear dividing lines as far as what's cool and what's not. And
Yeah, no, definitely. So for all intent and purposes, like the music that you were making with Nate and your other cousins and what have you, did you guys actually form a band? Like, is Finch your, like, I guess for lack of a better term, like first real band, or were there other ones that you obviously had that you played a few shows here and there with?
no, I was in a band called Beta Factor for a long time while Finch was coming up, and actually had a demo deal. Finch actually took us on tour in 2004. So I've got a long history with the dudes, and it's just funny to think of myself in the band. You know what I mean? Even after all this time, I feel like it's definitely my band, but sometimes I look back on it and it's like, wow, how did I end up here? It's weird.
Well, yeah, no, you definitely have an interesting perspective where it's like you came into the band when obviously the quote unquote commercial appeal had sort of worn off, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, we're not going to make $1 million off this band. So intentions of you playing weren't from like the, oh dude, I can't wait to like cash in on this. It was just like, no, I'm playing with my cousin again.
Yeah, exactly. It was way more, it's always been about playing a good show or writing a great song or whatever. And to the guys' credit, all the guys in Finch, all past members, everybody, it's like no one was ever very careerist about Finch. You know what I mean? No one was really chasing the money or anything. I think the music definitely came from a fairly honest and genuine place and a desire to just play. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The band's body of work, I think, is a testament to that, because it's not like the band did themselves any favors.
No,
by
certainly not.
Each subsequent release from like all right, let's try to capitalize on the momentum. It's just like, no, man, we're gonna make a really challenging record.
Yeah, and I think that's both the blessing and the curse of being in a band like Finch. It's like, find 10 or 15 years later that you have a big group of fans that get it and respect your body of work and things that the band has done, and then you see other peer bands of yours that are much more careerist minded and did capitalize, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? I'm not talking shit on that, but it's just not how the story of Finch went. You know what I mean? It's just, for better or worse, that's not what happened.
That's the reality that you guys lived in, rather than
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, because who knows, if the band existed in the whatever Los Angeles area, not the cultural void that you guys lived in, you could have been influenced in so many different other ways.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so then as you started to go through high school, and obviously you were watching Finch start to formulate and stuff like that. And so was your first band, you said I'm sorry, it was
Beta Factor was what the band was called. Yeah.
And so that I remember your guys' name kicking around, but was that kind of, for all intent and purposes, sort of your first band that you started to play out with?
Yeah. We made a couple independent records and did some independent touring. We did a bunch of DIY West Coast touring, bought our own van, printed our own merch, the whole deal. Eventually, we got a demo deal with Capitol Records, actually, and came under the wing of a guy named Lauren Israel, he was a director of A&R there, and he taught us a lot about the business, good and bad. You know what I mean? Eventually what happened is we went and made a record that was supposed to get submitted to Capitol for, consideration, probably be released under one of their indies, I think that was 2002, 3, and they laid off fucking everybody at Capitol. And I think Lauren lost his job and a bunch of people moved on, and we got lost in the shuffle, and eventually the band broke up. So
with your experience with that, it is one of those things where it's like, because you guys, I mean, most bands that kind of fall under the sort of demo deal wing, your experience is unfortunately more common than the other.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
you didn't get soured by that?
Yeah, yes and no. It's hard. You don't really have any expectations at that point. You know what I mean? You feel like you're young enough at that point. I was 21, maybe 22. And you feel like there's just another opportunity around the corner. You know what I mean? You're naive enough still at that age to feel like well, just start another band or do it again in a different way and it'll be fine. Lo and behold, that's not how it works.
Right. Yeah, it's not as easy as that.
Yeah. But, for better or worse at that age, that's how you think. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that band didn't work out and we got screwed on this deal, put in 5 years work with a band and the industry takes a shit on you and, well, we'll just start another one,
Did you have any ideas of, were you going to college? Like, did you have other sort of career aspirations, or was music what you wanted to solely focus on?
I was going to community college and had plans to go to art school. And then I got married and then I started doing video production. So I was doing a lot of video production, doing local commercials and, just independent projects and educational stuff and just stuff to pay the bills, And
Sure.
I had a nice little video production company for a while. And then Finch broke up in 2004 or took a hiatus. And Nate and I started a band at that point called Cosmonaut. And we wrote songs and played a couple shows and tried to make something happen. And then that didn't really go anywhere for one reason or another. And then at that point, Finch came calling and they asked me and Drew, who was the drummer in Cosmonaut, to be the rhythm section for the reunited Finch. So we took the gig. It was great.
Something I also find interesting, and honestly one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you in particular, Finch is weird. Like, I know that sounds like a very general blanket statement, but it's like the band, generally speaking, I mean, you guys do interviews, but it's like, you generally kind of hit on a lot of the topics like we were joking about before I was recording of like, I'm not going to talk to you about how sick the new record is. Where generally speaking, the band, for all intent and purposes, like, I don't feel like the band is a personality, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but like you guys seem solely focused on, like, I wouldn't even say deflecting like personal narratives about each member of the band, but just like really like, yo, we're about the music. Like, yeah, there's other components of us as individuals that comprise this. In a long way of asking, you guys are very mysterious, and I presume there's some intentionality in regards to just the way that you present that aspect of it, or is it just like by a byproduct of who you are as people?
I think it's more of a byproduct of who we are as people, and it's kind of, I guess, over the years become our MO. I think everyone kind of understands that about our band, and a big part of that is the attention that the guys got so early on and so quick. I think they realized that they don't want to have their life out there and have everyone know their personal business right off the bat. I mean, those dudes were so young when they got signed, and they had a gold record by the time they were frickin' 20 years old. That's a lot of pressure for young songwriters, and I don't think there was a lot of intentionality in what they were doing. I mean, obviously they were working hard at what they were doing, but I don't think anyone started Finch with the aspirations of being the biggest band in the world. I think they just wanted to play great music, And so over the course of the years, it's like that's just become, how we do things. And I don't think there's a lot of, premeditated, hey, we're not going to, do in-depth interviews, or we're not going to do a round of, a concept record that has costumes involved and makeup and, what I mean? It's like, that's just not, It's just not us. It's like, if we did that, I don't think that we'd be able to look at each other straight on stage. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, I
mean, I think it's probably way more of a byproduct of the individuals in the band that more than anything else.
Yeah, I definitely think, I think you're right in that estimation. And I think something I've always noticed too, I mean, granted, it's been a while since I've actually watched you guys perform live, but the times that I was watching the band, in the early to mid 2000s before the hiatus happened, Nate always for sure seemed like the reluctant frontman. He was the guy that could have obviously sing and scream and deliver what the band wanted to, but it was just like, by default, he's the singer, as opposed to like, dude, I can't wait to get up on stage and just like be the star.
Yeah, I don't think he ever embodied that role that I think a lot of people assume a lead singer should embody. It's funny. To me, Nate is he's one of the greatest singers out there. He's pretty amazing. He's pretty humble about it. You know what I mean? I don't think he's in it for his ego or anything else. I think he, as cheesy as it sounds, it's like, I think he loves what he does, and that's enough for him. You know what I mean? It's enough. Yeah. It's enough to be able to walk out on stage and play songs. I don't think he necessarily feels the need to go any further. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, where it's like there definitely is that presumption of the vocalist of any band to be A, the most outgoing, B, the most gregarious, C, the leader of the band.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
if you don't hit every tick mark as a singer, that's when people start to go like, yo, what's wrong with that dude?
Yeah.
And it's like, and that honestly, that's like kind of the lore, for lack of a better term, around Finch, where it's just like, yeah, Nate's kind of a weird guy. Like he's kind of to himself,
But that's just him. I mean, for us, it's like, I mean, I understand maybe that's how the audience use it, or it gets turned around a little bit, from the other angle. But for us, it's just like it's just him. That's how he is in his personal life. That's how he is on stage. You know what I mean?
By extension, this is how he's going to be on the
Yeah,
stage.
exactly.
Your own personal experience in regards to, once you started to, once you're asked to join Finch and obviously be a part of that, like you said, there was that weird notion of just like, oh, like, I guess I'm just playing with my cousin again. And like, you were able to take the knowledge that you had of the band, intimately, because you were kind of on the sidelines. Was there any sort of like expectations that you placed on yourself of being like, oh man, I hope that them asking me was a good decision and I'm not going to screw this up?
No, I mean, I've been great friends with those guys since the beginning, so it felt very natural to join the band. And I mean, the only thing is I had to learn 2 albums worth of material in like 2 months to play a reunion show. I mean, it was a lot of work. It felt very natural. I was to be in a room with Nate and the other guys playing music. It felt pretty normal, you know what I mean? So And I think by extension, for them to do a member change and have me come along, I think it felt just as comfortable for them that they didn't have to get to know someone different. You know what I mean? So
yeah, definitely. Obviously, as you started to become more ingrained, directly within the band, and you started to, know how they work, obviously from like a business perspective, and kind of, know the inner workings of a band. Did you notice any of the, I guess, for lack of a better term, like lingering scars that the band had, just because obviously they had been, kind of tossed around within the music industry, and more so from the business side than obviously the creative output? Did you notice any of those things where it's like, oh, dude, we're not going to do that again? Like that was an awful decision or whatever.
I mean, a little bit here and there, but I mean, for the most part, those dudes like care pretty much about putting on a good show and writing a good song. Business decisions come and go. Good tours happen, bad tours happen, good shows, bad shows. They wear their scars pretty well. You know what I mean? I don't, not too many bitter cases in our band. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of great, I think people are grateful. They're grateful for the opportunity that the band has given them in their personal lives. And it's a pretty humble group of dudes, to be honest, And that was kind of fun for me to walk into. I wasn't walking into a group of prima donnas or something, and, getting shit on for a couple of years and having to go through any sort of like hazing process or anything like that. So,
right.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of lingering shit going on with the band. I mean, I think they felt good about where they were. That the issues that they had with some of the other members and just what they had done, I think the hiatus had taken care of a lot of that. I think at that point in their career, they just needed some time off. You know what I mean? I think if they look back on it, I imagine most of the guys would say we shouldn't have called it a hiatus. We should have just taken a year off. You know what I mean? And spent a year at home and regrouped later. Well,
yeah, there's definitely that pressure that bands feel once you kind of step on the treadmill of like, I got to keep feeding the meter in order to keep the success of whatever it is that we're doing, alive, because obviously it's like every outsider from like the record label to management to whoever is, making an income off the band. When the band is like, yo, we're going to take a year and a half off, everyone's like, whoa, pump the brakes. Like, we're not going to see money from you for a year and a half. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure that there was some of that played into it.
You mentioned you're married. See, it sounds like you got married at a quote unquote relatively earlier age than most people would have.
Yeah.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 22.
That's relatively young in the sort of independent music
scope
of things.
Yeah, definitely. I don't really know anyone else that got married that young. We were high school sweethearts and we just decided to get married. It was. And we're still together. So
you're doing something right, dude.
Yeah, hopefully, you'd like to think so. Do one thing right with your life anyway. So
I always find it straight. I mean, I myself, I've been married now. I'm 34 and I've been married since I was 24. And it's like, it is weird.
Yeah.
When it's like I'm seeing so many of my friends either just getting married or just starting to think about having kids, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I mean, I only have one child,
Yeah.
but it is weird because you feel like you're like, dude, did I do that? Was I like super ahead of the curve on this? Like,
Yeah, it definitely changes your life in a way, especially when you look at your friend groups and everything. It's like, you take on responsibility earlier, or you have different things that you worry about. We had a kid when we were 25, 26,
okay, yeah,
and we only have one. It definitely changes the way that you look at life and changes the way that you process opportunities and the way you conduct yourself. And and almost all my friends, they're off doing their thing and not getting married and not having kids. And so it is what it is. But, I guess
Yeah.
when you get to your 30s, it's like everyone ends up somewhere with a life partner, or, getting married or having kids or getting divorced, something,
Yeah, there's got to be some life changes.
Yeah.
With Finch in particular, you haven't had to like grind it out in the sense of obviously you're not getting in the van 300 days out of the year and having to really focus on the development stage of that band. I'm sure a lot of that is awesome because you obviously don't have to be away from your family and be away from a lot of these other things that happen in life. And I presume that the band is set up now to where it's like you guys basically only kind of do what you want to do rather than having to, like we were talking about earlier, like feed the meter, so to speak.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of that. I mean, there's still, when we decide to do the band, because it stops and starts over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And when I joined in 2007, we did a lot of touring for 3 years, tried to write a third record and it didn't work out. And then we took another hiatus and then we got back together for the 10-year stuff. So, I mean, it's definitely been an up and down road, but when the band is on and we're working, we take the opportunities that we need to take. You know what I mean? It's like no one makes money off of record sales anymore. It's like you have to go out and you got to play the shows and you got to make your money that way and sell your merch and stuff. I mean, it'd be nice to only do one tour a year and make the money that you want to make, but that just doesn't happen. You know what I mean? You got to tour a lot more than you think you have to, and we have good shows and bad shows and good tours and bad tours. Sometimes we come home from a tour and it's like, well, we got to hit the road again in a couple months, so
Right.
it's still a blue collar, type working band. No one's selling 1 million records anymore, you know what I mean? And no one's making that kind of money, at least not in the rock world.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still having to go out to work for it, for sure.
For all intent and purposes, you the members of Finch, like this is your full-time thing as far as like you guys are doing the band from, a not only a full-time like writing and creative process, but obviously from a business sense of the term as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely our focus. I mean, everyone does their little side gigs and makes money on the side and has other life aspirations and things. And, but that's how the music business is now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No one's going to pay your way anymore. So you're not going to get a $500,000 record advance and be able to take a couple years to make a record. And, you're not going to sign a deal and go buy a house. It just doesn't work that way anymore,
Last thing I wanted to hit on before I let you go was the putting Finch into a musical corner as far as like trying to describe what the band does is next to impossible. Because there are very few bands where you can kind of like look at every single record as like a market departure.
Yeah.
But it's like you guys have had this sort of like, cut and burn approach for every single record. Through that, you're able to filter out the people who are just into like a song or two of yours rather than the band as a whole.
Yeah.
Where it stands right now in the current state of Finch, like, who are the people that you kind of see at the shows that have sort of like, for lack of a better term, like weathered the storm and followed you guys? Is it people that you see from the earliest days, or is it people that you see that have got into you in later or subsequent records?
I think there's a healthy batch from every record, if that makes any sense. It's like there's a bunch of diehard What It Is to Burn fans that still come out to shows, and a real healthy amount of Say Hello to Sunshine fans. And then we have a nice group of people that, found the band through their older brother or something like that. And they're like, oh yeah, we love all the records. And it's definitely a nice mix of, people our age down, you know what I mean? Where, we have, kids, 13, 14-year-old kids that come and say, it's my first time seeing the band and it's great. And I've been listening to your records and this is my first chance to see you guys and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of cool to see that. We're not running and a very active scene. You know what I mean? The scene has changed a lot. Punk rock and
Right.
hardcore has changed so much that, you know, it's hard for us to look at the music that we make and look at the way that people describe it and to see any sort of connection. It's like people call it post-hardcore and screamo and all these label genres, and it's like that doesn't make any sense to any of us, because when we were on Warped Tour and you see what hardcore bands are doing now and what punk bands are doing now, it definitely doesn't sound like us. And that's not a knock on them. It's just there's just a big difference there. You know, I feel like we're a little bit outside of all that and doing our own thing. And I think that's a big reason why we're able to keep a fan base. I think that people that are willing to go on that ride with us, I think that it's rewarding for them, for music fans. And, you know, back when I was listening to bands, it didn't matter what a record sounded like. You know what I mean? When Alice in Chains released an acoustic album, it's like no one talked shit on it. It's like, hey, there's a bunch of great songs. Cool. You know, it's like, I don't know. It just people didn't discriminate as much back then. Yes. Or maybe it's just in my little world. I don't know.
No, I can see what you're saying. And it's like even, you know, at the peak of waves in Finch's career, as far as like, you know, when it was easy to tag the band, you know, screamo, and it's, oh, they're part of the drive-through generation, and like this is what they're doing. If Finch had a choice in the matter as far as the bands they toured with, it was always the weird ass bands. It was always like, dude, like, okay, that's clearly a Finch choice. Like,
yeah.
I mean, and it's you know, even pointed to obviously the tours that you guys do now, where it's like if you are doing your own headlining thing, the bands that are on your bills are bands that either A, don't sound like you, or B, there's a friendship connection there. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. Basically, it's like you guys are just such a weird thing that has been like sort of shoehorned into a lot of these different scenes just because of by default that's what the sounds were.
Yeah.
But you guys never fully, I guess, wore that coat.
Well, I feel like it's pretty telling of where we came from, or where the band came from, and where we are now. It's like we kind of started as the suburban outsider band, and I don't think that I mean, we weren't connected to a scene when the band started, and I mean, I feel like we're going to end up not connected to a scene whenever we end. And it's like, I think we're proud of that independent streak in the band. And I think that, you know, you made mention of, you know, kind of a cut and burn policy with each record. It's funny, we don't think about it that way. It's like, if we're going to sit down to write a record, it's like no one talks about like what they want it to sound like. You know what I mean? No one talks about like any motivations as far as, hey, we want to make a electronic record, or we want to make like a math rock record, or we want to make like a pretty alt rock record. It's like, no, we just like whatever is happening that year or that month when we're writing, and it feels good when we're playing it, that's what ends up on the record. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's more of a testament to the 5 fairly strong personalities in the band that no one's really willing to accept anything that isn't, you know, really, really good to our ears. Right. And I think if they would have tried to write What It Is to Burn #2 right after that record, I don't think they would have been happy with it. And when we sat down to write Back to Oblivion, you know, no one was talking about, hey, should we do What It Is to Burn #2 or Say Hello to Sunshine #2? It wasn't about that at all. It was like, what kind of band are we now? You know what I mean? What feels good to us now? You know?
Yeah.
What really gets our blood pumping now, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. So then with that being said, like if you were to self-identify the role that you fill in the band, like, cause obviously there are definitely different, you know, common tropes that happen within the band where it's like, okay, that guy's like using a random example of a band like Thrice, where it's like a band like Thrice, you can kind of clearly see where it's like, okay, the drummer Riley is super into heavy stuff. So it's like most of the heavy stuff you hear in Thrice probably originated from him. And like, okay, the electronic stuff is Tepe and whatever. You could kind of go down the line. So what sort of role do you find you yourself kind of filling? And then if there's any other sort of marked band members that you can point to where it's like, oh yeah, that dude's bringing in this sort of heat for these sort of records or whatever.
Well, it's funny because if anyone tries to take too big of a stake in Finch, you know what I mean? Like, Like
Okay.
everyone's a songwriter on some level, and at different points in different albums, and someone is more of the primary than not or whatever, but everything ends up going through all 5 people. And it really is democracy in that sense that, like, I could write a song and bring it to the band, and it could end up being a great song, or I could write a song and bring it to the band and it ends up disappearing because it didn't work out, or because one of the guys out of the 4 didn't like it, and so it doesn't make it. It's a really it's a difficult process in that sense, that there's no one principal songwriter in the band. But I think that it helps us retain a level of quality that I think we're all looking for. It really is a democracy.
Yeah, Daniel, you're not answering my question, dude. Are you the heavy guy or the No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know that anyone's the heavy guy anymore. I mean, we're 34 years old, but
Right. No, that's true. There definitely comes a point where all of the hard edges get sort of smoothed out from that perspective. And so as it stands currently, with the future of Finch, and like obviously what you guys, not even so much like, oh, what tours do you have coming up, but it's like, is it one of those things that you guys plan on basically just be like, all right, I guess it feels time to do a new record. I guess it feels time to like sit in the room and write stuff, or you guys kind of all actively being creative in that process and then bringing it to the table?
I think that we're in a pretty good, it feels like we're in a pretty good rhythm right now. I think everyone is already wanting to and thinking about the next record, and everyone seems pretty motivated to build on the momentum we were able to generate over the last couple of years, and feels like we're kind of fighting for a livelihood. You know what I mean? And I don't mean monetarily. I mean that, like, we enjoy being in the band together. We enjoy touring and we enjoy making records, and we realize that there's not a lot of 34-year-old dudes out there that get a chance to make records and tour. And I think that we're all pretty motivated by the luck that we've had over so many years, and I think that we want to make good on it.
Yeah. So you feel I guess, for lack of a better term, like hungry from that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we see an opportunity for the band to continue to grow. We see the opportunity to be able to continue making records, and I don't think we want to waste it.
That's sweet, dude.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate the time and dishing for me as long as you have, because I'm sure you haven't been badgered too much along these trains of thought of new and old stuff.
Yeah. It's nice to talk about life rather than talk about the genres.
Sick riff. Right.
So there you go. That was Daniel. Yeah, I really love the stories of bands that exist in sort of this cultural vacuum where it's like sometimes maybe it's mythologized than it actually is, but I think it's really cool that they were living out in a desert town, had very little to do, so they decided to start a band, and it sounded like this weird mix of all this stuff that was happening, but they didn't really know that it was happening. And then all of a sudden they were thrust into the limelight, and Drive-Thru Records boosted them up to a level of fame that they just didn't even know existed. But anyways, it was a very interesting story. And I hope you enjoyed it. So visit 100wordspodcast.com. Tom Richfield is the producer extraordinaire. So many great guests coming up. So sign up for the email newsletter on the right side of the page. And you'll get a little sneak preview. So until next week, thank you, everybody.